Look at these vast American territories: California, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico. Today, these are 8 wealthy states, home to nearly one-third of the U.S. population. But 200 years ago, all of this land belonged to another country, Mexico. Why did it lose them? Because it lost a war started by U.S. President James Polk. At his inauguration, he declared it a vital goal for the nation to expand its borders westward, including the annexation of Texas and California. In less than 2 years, the U.S. took half of all Mexican land, eliminating a dangerous competitor on the continent. In the end, one country became a global superpower, while the other remained a supplier of resources and labor. Today, Mexicans are among the world's most industrious and cheerful people. Mexico is easily one of the 20 largest economies in the world, ranking 13th in terms of economic size and 10th in terms of population. The country is rich in natural resources and has a favorable geographic location, overlooking 2 oceans and bordering the richest country in the world. But with all these advantages, why is Mexico still one of the most dangerous and corrupt countries in the world? Consider the 2,000-mile, 3,155-kilometer U.S.-Mexico border. One of its key points is the city of Nogales. Its uniqueness lies in the fact that one part of the city is in the United States and the other in Mexico. They share a common history, culture, climate, and even ethnic makeup. However, statistics show that they are 2 different worlds separated by a rusty metal fence. In the Mexican part of Nogales, there were 365 murders in 2021, almost one a day. In the U.S. part, none. The median household income in Mexican Nogales is $14,000 a year. On the other side of the fence, in the American part, that figure reaches $32,000. 2/3 of the residents of American Nogales have a college degree, while only 1/3 of the residents of Mexican Nogales have a college degree. What is the reason for such a striking contrast between these 2 parts of the same city? And why some countries are rich and others are poor? The authors explain the differences in wealth among countries by their approaches to social and economic management. There are 2 kinds of states: inclusive states. Here, the rules of the game are designed to encourage the emergence of new leaders who can compete with each other, earn honestly, and are not afraid to lose their property, thanks to stable laws. The new rich are not created by robbing the old, but by creating something new and useful for society. Such countries in history show steady growth and success. Extractive states. In these countries, the rules of the game are similar to the king of the mountain. Whoever gets to the top changes the laws in his favor, protects his own position, and siphons off resources from society. Here, the state focuses on protecting the elite and preventing the growth of new competitors. As a result, the overall economic pie grows slowly, with most of it going to the privileged. How does this work in Mexico? Consider the case of Carlos Slim, a Mexican billionaire. For 4 years, he held the title of the world's richest man, beating even giants like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. At the time, his wealth was estimated at 58% of the GDP of all of Mexico. To put that in perspective, there were 112 million people in the country at the time, and one man controlled nearly 2/3 of the national wealth. What's the problem? Carlos Slim gained control of key sectors of the Mexican economy: telecommunications, infrastructure, and banking. Following the privatization of state-owned enterprises in the 1990s, his company, Telmex, came to dominate the telecommunications sector. In effect, Slim turned his company into a monopoly with little or no competition. As a result, millions of Mexicans are forced to pay high prices for inferior service, with profits going into the billionaire's pocket. At first glance, Carlos Slim's success suggests that Mexico has enormous potential. A country of 129 million people, expected to grow to 150 to 160 million by 2050. A major factor is the low level of wages. At the same time, Mexicans are one of the hardest working nations in the world, working even more than Korean workaholics. When you combine these 2 factors, large population and low labor costs, Mexico becomes an ideal place for cheap manufacturing. Take the automotive industry, for example. Today, all the major automakers have opened plants in Mexico. The country is almost on par with Germany and South Korea in terms of the number of cars assembled. However, there is a nuance. Most of the cars produced in Mexico do not stay in the country. They are exported north to the United States. And it's not just cars that take this route. Millions of ordinary Mexicans are also trying to get from Mexico to the United States. Take a look at this map published by The Economist in 2014. It shows how many people of Mexican descent live in different U.S. states. According to official figures, there are already 37 million of them. Consider the scale. In 2022, Mexican migrants living in the United States sent home $58.5 billion. But let's take a look at an even more curious comparison. What Mexico makes the most money at? Top income items include exports of cars, trucks, parts, oil, and computer manufacturing. But each of these categories brings in less than remittances from Mexicans in the United States. Now, guess who is the biggest buyer of Mexican goods? The United States. In fact, Mexico is a cheap factory and a reserve of cheap labor for the United States. This dependence began a long time ago. In 1942, at the height of World War II, millions of American men went off to fight in Europe and on other fronts. But the US economy continued to be the largest supplier of weapons and food to the Allies. There was a severe labor shortage. That same year, the US government signed a treaty with Mexico. 2 to 4.5 million Mexican workers went to work in American fields, factories, and railroads. They began to provide the economic strength for the United States during those years. As the war ended and soldiers began to return to their jobs, the U.S. organized another operation. Over the course of 5 years, about 3.5 million Mexicans were deported back to their homeland. But as you might have guessed, even after that, U.S. companies didn't give up on cheap Mexican labor. Latin American migrants continued to be hired illegally because they did not have to provide Social Security and could be paid less than minimum wage. Employers kept the difference, not forgetting to bribe government inspectors to avoid sanctions. In the mid-20th century, as many as 1 million Mexicans crossed the border into the United States illegally each year, and that number continues to grow. Why are Mexicans so eager to come to the U.S., despite their country's economic growth, high-tech industries, and household names? The answer can be found by comparing the homicide rates in the Mexican and American parts of the city of Nogales. Overall, Mexico has one of the highest homicide rates in the world, and the situation is only getting worse. In 2019, a U.S. senator tried to calculate how much Mexicans make from drug sales in the U.S. His estimate was $500 billion, but experts believe the real amount is much less, about $50 billion, which is comparable to Mexico's income from oil exports. Despite the difficulty of verifying the exact figures, one thing is clear. The U.S. remains the world's largest consumer of drugs. The most convenient way to get drugs into the U.S. is through the Mexican border. Mexico used to be just a conduit through which Colombian cocaine was smuggled into the U.S., such as California. But with the growing popularity of synthetic drugs, the situation has changed. Today, Mexican cartels are becoming major producers themselves, making the country a key player in the global drug market. Look at these pictures. The wall shows 4,000 young Americans who have died from fentanyl and methamphetamine overdoses. Unlike cocaine or heroin, which require large plantations, security guards, and complex production, synthetic drugs are much easier to make. Here's how it works. Mexican mini manufacturers are hired and paid $100 a day, far more than they can earn on local plantations. Chinese chemistry and clear instructions with ingredient dosages are provided. In just one day, $1 million or $2 worth of products are produced. Cartels organize everything: production, logistics, security. But this is not limited to drug trafficking. These fighters, for example, they are not government special forces. They are the personal army of one of the cartels. There are tens of thousands of such armed units in the country, and they are no worse equipped than the regular army. Under these conditions, the legitimate question is, why should the cartels be afraid of the authorities? They have them, their own army, stable revenues, control of various spheres, and the cartels don't just deal in drugs. They steal oil and sell it to the US themselves. They are even taking over the export of avocados, the so-called green gold. Mexico is the world's largest producer of avocados, with sales of up to $3 billion a year. They seize the crops, they drive out or kill the farmers, they start growing and selling avocados themselves. This lawlessness and lack of rules leads to unprecedented levels of violence and murder, which raises another logical question. Why can't the state deal with the crime? The answer is simple. The state is not some abstract Martian. Officials are ordinary people who grow up in, depend on, and feed off a corrupt system. In a country where corruption is woven into the very fabric of society, it is extremely difficult to combat such problems. Meet Vicente Fox Quesada, the former president of Mexico. He led the country for 6 years, the maximum allowed by law, without seeking re-election. During his tenure, the economy grew by 12%, and the homicide rate reached historic lows. But note one interesting fact: Coca-Cola consumption in the country has skyrocketed over the years. In 1990, Mexico consumed 280 bottles of Coca-Cola per person per year. In 2000, 456, and in 2010, 675th. So where is the connection between the economy, a former president, and soda? Things get even more interesting when you consider that before becoming head of state, Fox worked for Coca-Cola for 15 years, serving as the company's Latin American manager. By his own admission, his first political donations came from Coca-Cola employees. They helped launch his career and provided important support. Of course, there is no direct evidence that his ties to the company contributed to his explosive sales growth, but the facts speak for themselves. Today, Mexico is the world's leading consumer of sweet carbonated beverages. More Coca-Cola is consumed here than in the United States. On average, a Mexican drinks 2 small bottles every day. Coca-Cola is so popular that even local shamans use it in their rituals. But the consequences of this cult of the drink are disastrous. In recent decades, the number of diabetics in Mexico has doubled, and 1 in 7 deaths is related to the disease. The number of obese children has increased by 40%. In total, 94 million Mexicans are overweight. Mexico is a country where sugary drinks kill more people than anywhere else. It's no wonder Coca-Cola invests heavily in this country as much as it does in the entire continent of Africa. Why it matters. Coca-Cola has 60% of the Mexican market and, more importantly, is solving one of the country's biggest problems: access to drinking water. The beverage industry requires vast amounts of water, which the company extracts from local rivers and lakes, depriving the indigenous population. Even the country's capital, Mexico City, is sinking 40 centimeters, 16 inches each year as the metropolis pumps water from beneath it. Now imagine what life is like in the provinces, where there may be no running water at all, and if there is, the quality of the water leaves much to be desired. In such a situation, Coca-Cola offers purest drinks that meet international standards, and people choose them, buying their children's soda instead of water. Mexico is a vivid example of how unlimited commercial interests influence society and its people. Multinational corporations open up new profitable industries. Neighboring countries take advantage of cheap labor. Geographic location becomes a conduit for smuggling illegal substances. And who benefits? Transnational corporations, wealthy neighbors, drug cartels, and the politicians who cover up the system. Where does this leave the ordinary people? Poverty, crime, and soaring death rates. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and share it. See you in the future.